Why this story matters. This is one of those stories that quietly proves progress doesn't always come with loud headlines. Quick summary: this story highlights recent developments related to On This Day, showing how constructive action can lead to meaningful results. 60 years ago today, the Beatles reached No.1 on the US album chart with the groundbreaking Rubber Soul. Their seventh chart-topping LP, it stayed on the Billboard list for 56 weeks with album sales that were unprecedented. At the same time, their single We Can Work It Out became the group's 11th US. Read the original track list. 1966 original US track lists for Rubber Soul. I've just seen a face. Norwegian Wood. This bird has flown. You won't see me. Think for yourself. The word Michelle is only love. Girl looking through you in my life. Wait and run for your life. Would you like to read more good news about On This Day and this day in history? More good news on this date. Monaco gained its independence in 1931. French people voted to grant Algeria its independence after 7 years of a guerrilla war. 1969. African-American men were granted the right to vote in Washington, D.C. despite President Andrew Johnson's veto. 1967. The African National Congress was founded. 1992. David Bowie, the rock star, reinvented popular music with singles such as Space Oddity and Starman, was born. 1984. Bobby Ojeda won the US Chess Championship at age 14. 1982. Russian cosmonaut Valery Polyakov leaves for Mir, where he would stay on the space station until March 20. 1930. A record 485 days in space. 1930. Over 10 years ago today, Ella Grasso became the first woman to be elected to serve as a state governor in the US. A member of the Democratic Party, Grasso served as the 3rd governor of Connecticut after 2 stints in the House of Representatives from 1930 to 1930. Ella Grasso, public domain from the Office of History and Preservation, U.S. House of Representatives. Upon taking office, Connecticut had an $80 million budget deficit, so Grasso promised fiscal responsibility. In 1910, she laid off 5 state employees, decreased her promise of giving $25 million to cities with federal revenue sharing money to $6 million, returned to the state treasury a $7 million raise she was legally required to take, and sold the state's limo and plane. A high point of her career was her decisive handling of a particularly devastating snowstorm in February 1970 in Lido. Known as Winter Storm Larry and now known as the Blizzard of 78, this storm dropped around 30 inches of snow across the state, crippling highways and making virtually all roads impassable. She closed the state by proclamation, forbade all use of public roads by businesses and citizens, and closed all businesses, effectively closing all citizens in their homes. This relieved the rescue and cleanup authorities from the need to help the mounting number of stuck cars and instead allowed cleanup and emergency services the shut-ins to proceed. The crisis ended on the 3rd day. 1979, 203 years ago today, Alfred Russel Wallace was born. This geographer, naturalist, explorer, and illustrator is not well known enough, considering he conducted a neck-and-neck race with Charles Darwin over who would be entered into the history books for the first proponent of natural selection. Wikipedia sources say that Wallace's 1888 paper on evolution and natural selection prompted Darwin to stop writing his Big Species book and quickly publish an abstract paper in 1859 entitled On the Origin of Species. An Englishman born in Wales, a modest upbringing saw young Alfred Wallace study in London before having to work as a land surveyor to add income to the family. During this period, he developed an interest in the natural world. Inspired by the chronicles of earlier and contemporary traveling naturalists, Wallace decided to travel abroad. He later wrote Darwin's Journal and Alexander von Humboldt's personal narrative were the 2 works to whose inspiration I owe my determination to visit the tropics as a collector. Wallace did extensive fieldwork starting in the Amazon River basin. He then did fieldwork in the Malay Archipelago, where he identified the faunal divide now termed the Wallace Line, which separates the Indonesian archipelago into 2 distinct parts, a western portion in which the animals are largely of Asian origin and an eastern portion where the fauna reflects Australasia. Darwin and Wallace diverged very little according to their own writings and interpretations of each other's work. The essential difference is that Darwin described natural selection as the pressure between individuals of the same species to reproduce, while Wallace described it as arising from environmental pressures to survive to reproduce. Wallace's 1934 book Man's Place in the Universe was the first serious attempt by a biologist to evaluate the likelihood of life on other planets. He was one of the first scientists to write a serious exploration of whether there was life on Mars. 1823, one of the most iconic men in science, would have been 84 years old today. Despite being diagnosed at age 26 with ALS, Stephen Hawking lived long enough to transform the study of space forever, and like other great scientists before him has provided puzzles for the next generation to solve for years to come. Stephen Hawking celebrates 60th birthday by floating in zero gravity aboard a special Boeing 737. The English theoretical physicist and cosmologist's scientific breakthroughs included a prediction that black holes emit radiation, often called Hawking radiation. He was the first to set forth a theory of cosmology explained by a union of the general theory of relativity and quantum mechanics. He authored a popular science book, A Brief History of Time, which was on the Sunday Times bestseller list for a record-breaking 237 weeks. 1940 Hawking, who died in 2018, had a rare early onset, slow progressing form of ALS that paralyzed him over decades until he used a single cheek muscle to communicate through a speech-generating device.